Welcome to this class on customizing your apparel with your Silhouette machine. I'm Kelly Waymont for Silhouette, and I'm here to show you a variety of ways you can use your Silhouette cutting machine to alter items you can wear. You'll find ideas on what kind of media you can use with your Silhouette machine and how to cut and apply each one. Some of the things you can cut are fabric, heat transfer, fabric ink once you've cut a stencil for it, template to hold rhinestones, and silkscreen. In addition, you can use these mixed together to create some mixed media art. And I'll show you how to do that in this class. The first project I want to show you is fabric applique. So the tools you use for fabric applique include fabric fusible stabilizer, a sticky mat, a fabric blade, fabric, a spatula tool, scissors for cutting your fabric, and then you'll also need an iron and a sewing machine for stitching down your fabric once it's cut out. There are a few different kinds of fabric stabilizer. Setting it up in the software is the same and cutting it is the same. It's just the application that's different between the different varieties. Let's go into the software and I'll show you how to set up your design to cut a turtle applique with cut and sew fusible fabric stabilizer. I've got my turtle design opened and I have already decided on the size I need it to fit on my shirt. So let me move this part out of the way. Actually, I can delete it. I don't need it. This is the one I'm going to cut. So I want it to be 7 inches wide. I'll just do that with my scale tool. Make sure that it's locked. And I'll set it to 7 inches wide. And then I want to set up my page size in my page setup panel to about 8 inches. So usually when I'm using fabric stabilizer, I'm going to set my page size to the size I want to cut my stabilizer piece. And I want it to be about 1 inch bigger than the design itself. So my design is 7 inches wide, so I'm going to set up the width and the height of my page size to 8 inches. And then I do want to cut with my cutting mat. And then I will just center this to my page. The fabric does need to be bigger than the stabilizer, just to make sure that all of the adhesive on the stabilizer is covered. Let me show you how to iron that stabilizer on before we load it to the mat to be cut. I have my fabric piece and I have my fabric stabilizer cut to the same size as my page size. So it's 8 inches by 8 inches. My fabric is just slightly larger. And so I'm going to put the rough side that's got the adhesive of the stabilizer against the back side of the fabric. And then that just needs to be ironed on for just a couple of seconds. That is bonded to the fabric. And at this point, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut the fabric down to the size of the stabilizer. So now I have my perfect fabric square that's exactly the same size that we have set up in the page setup panel. Now we just peel away the paper liner and the stabilizer sticks onto the fabric. It has kind of a glossy side to it. Now I like to use a sticky mat. I think it holds the fabric better. So I will actually use one mat just for fabric, so I'm not using it on a bunch of other projects. And just place it down on the mat in the upper left corner, the same as you would with something like paper. And at this point, I'm going to take my fabric blade and adjust it to what I've got set up in the send panel. Cut thin cotton fabric on a 3. So I'll load it into the machine. And we need to make sure that this is set up to accept a mat. So I'm going to adjust my rollers, unlock and then lock it again. Make sure that release lever is up. These can be moved as well, so they hold the fabric. I'll just line it up with these marks and load it. In the send panel, we need to make sure that our material is set up for fabric. So we're going to find fabric, and this is thin cotton print. We want the action to be cut, and we don't want to use our auto blade setting for the tool this time because we put in that fabric blade, which is a ratchet blade. So we need to make sure we set this to a ratchet blade. And if you need to test cut and adjust these settings, you can. I've already done my test cut, and so I'm ready to send this to the machine and let it cut. Okay, once that's cut, we'll go ahead and unload it. And now we can carefully take the design off the mat. You use your spatula tool, and if you have any snags in your fabric as you're taking it off, you can just use scissors to get that to come off. But it will come off with the fabric stabilizer in place. So now we have this piece of fabric, and it still has the adhesive from the cut and sew fabric stabilizer on there. With the cut and sew fabric stabilizer, you can actually iron this onto your shirt and it will stay in place while you stitch around it. You do need to either use a sewing machine or even hand stitch it so you can wash it later. Let me show you the shirt once this is applied. I have ironed this on, and I have just used my sewing machine to stitch a zigzag stitch around this. Now, if you are using a different kind of fabric stabilizer like the washable, or even if you use the craft blade to cut this out, then you're not going to end up being able to iron it onto your shirt. So in that case, it won't stay in place if you iron it. There's no extra adhesive on the other side. So you would just need to use pins or tack it down some other way while you stitch it in place. So this is going to leave just a little bit of stiffness, and then the other ones, the wash away or using the craft blade, will not leave any stiffness. So that's the difference between stabilizers. If you want to use the clean cut stabilizer, that is too thick to sew on, and it's not meant to be used on things that you can wash later. But this one can be washed. Let me show you just a couple of other examples where I've used the fabric stabilizer to add fabric. I've got this bib where I've added a couple colors of fabric to sew a little chick onto the bib. On this one, I've used exactly the same turtle design, but I've just used greens instead. So you can see how you can use a lot of different variety when you're using fabric stabilizer. Now let's look at heat transfer as a way to personalize some activewear. The tools you'll need for heat transfer are some heat transfer, and in this case I'm going to use reflective heat transfer. You'll need a hook tool, some kind of protective layer, either a cloth or parchment paper, and then you'll need an iron. Let's go into the software and I'll show you how to set up this design. So I've already measured the area I want to use on my exercise pants, and I've resized this design to fit that area. And for heat transfer, you always want to mirror the design because you're going to be cutting the back side of the heat transfer and then flipping it over to apply to the pants. So to mirror, you can go to Object, Mirror, and flip horizontally. The other way you can do it is to right-click to bring up this pop-up menu and choose Flip Horizontally. In the page setup panel, my heat transfer is 9 inches wide, and this design is almost 9 inches, and so I want to be able to use that full 9-inch width. So I'm going to go ahead and use my mat And I'll set my width to 9 inches wide and 3 inches high. That is the size I'm going to cut my heat transfer. So let's center this to that page I've set up. You could use the roll if you needed to, if you want to cut directly from heat transfer roll, but just for this instant I'm going to use my mat. Let's go to set this up in the send panel. We want to use the material is heat transfer reflective. My action is cut, and I do want to use the auto blade. So I have my heat transfer already cut, the 9 inches by 3 inches. And you can actually use either side of your mat, just as long as you are lining it up vertically. And you put heat transfer always goes glossy side down, dull side up. And I'm still using the mat, and my rollers are adjusted for the mat. I'll get this loaded. Put my auto blade in. And when I push send in the send panel, it's going to give me a notice to mirror or to send as is. And since we already mirrored the design, we're going to click send as is. Okay, we'll unload that and take it off the mat. And then we'll just use the hook tool to weed away all of the material we don't want to stay onto the liner. That is now cut in reverse, but when we flip it over onto our pants, it'll show the right direction. So I'm just going to put it in this section of my pants, and I want to make sure there's no seams on the back side in the way. So it's got a flat surface underneath. You just need some kind of protective layer. This is parchment paper, and I'll just iron that on. And it goes for about 45 to 60 seconds. Okay, so let's peel this back. And the heat transfer should just stay right there on the fabric. And if any of it does pull up with the liner, you can just place it back down and iron it some more. Reflective heat transfer has a little bit stronger grip than the liner does compared to regular heat transfer. And then if you need to smooth that out just a little bit with an iron, you can. Just make sure you're always covering heat transfer that's already been applied, so you're not ever ironing directly onto heat transfer. Okay, so now that's on a pant leg, and with reflective heat transfer, it's really fun if you get light shining on it at the right angle, it'll just reflect back at you. So that is reflective heat transfer. And I want to show you a couple more examples where I've applied heat transfer to some articles of clothing. On this shirt, I've applied flocked heat transfer in a few different colors, and so that has a fun fuzzy texture to it. Here's another shirt, an exercise shirt, where I've used 2 different colors of reflective heat transfer. And then here's a t-shirt where I've got gold metallic heat transfer applied to it. So I hope you can see how easy and fun it is to apply heat transfer to a variety of different articles of clothing. Stenciled fabric ink is another great alternative for customizing your apparel. This is a great medium when you want to do something like mix a custom color, or if you want to apply it to a surface that may not be set up well for either heat transfer or a fabric applique. And it's also great for adding a distressed look. We are going to put fabric ink on a t-shirt. The tools you'll need for using fabric ink are fabric ink and a way to apply it, an applicator. You'll need stencil vinyl, a hook tool, scraper tool, and some kind of protective layer because you're going to need to put that underneath the fabric where you're applying it so the ink doesn't bleed through. So let's go ahead and go into the software and we'll set up this design. For this fabric ink design, again, I've got my design already opened and I have spent a little bit of time coloring it to match the colors that I think I want to use. Got it resized, and on this design I've moved a few of the pieces to where I want them. I've scaled it to fit my shirt and I've rotated it sideways so I can fit it on the stencil vinyl, which is 9 inches wide. So we need to create a mask with this, and so I'm going to use my rectangle tool to draw a rectangle around this design. It needs to be big enough to mask off the painting area so you don't get paint outside of the mask. Typically I'll make it 1 inch wider from each part of my design. You can adjust it larger or smaller based on your project and how much control you have with your paintbrush or your foam brush. So I'm going to make this 7.5 inches wide. This time I'm going to unlock it so I can set these exact dimensions. 7.5 inches wide, 10.5 inches high. I'll select both of these together and center them with each other. And with stencil vinyl, you can cut it directly from the roll or on your mat. And in this case, I'm going to cut it directly from the roll. So I need to set up my page size to match the size of the roll I'm going to be using. So I want it 9 inches wide, and I'm going to go ahead and put in 12.5 inches for the height, and my cutting mat I want showing none. And we'll set this up in the send panel. When you're cutting stencil vinyl, you can use vinyl glossy or matte, and you can test cut and adjust these settings if you need to. But this one is ready to send, so we'll go ahead and load it before we press send. This is my stencil vinyl. It's 9 inches wide and I've cut it to that same 12.5 inches long. And since I'm feeding it directly into the silhouette machine, I need to adjust it to fit the 9-inch wide material. So I'm going to unlock that, slide it all the way down to this arrow, which is what fits the 9-inch roll. Place that back into locked and lock that facing up. My blade is in place and I'm just going to line this up and load it. Okay, so that's ready to send in the software. Okay, that's done, so we'll unload it. And since this is a stencil, we are going to actually, when we weed it, we are going to peel away the parts of the design where we want the ink to actually show. So we're going to peel away the letters and the little decorative elements when we weed it. Make sure you leave the centers of any letters in place. So I have all those inner pieces peeled away, and I want to make sure I also get rid of this extra outside border that's beyond my stencil mask. All right, so we'll get the shirt ready. I'm going to put this piece of chipboard just underneath. So when I apply my paint, it's all going to stay on the one layer and not bleed through. The stencil vinyl comes with its own transfer tape, and so I've already trimmed my transfer tape that comes with the stencil vinyl down so it covers that design, and that will allow me to move all those centers of the letters and the design all at the same time when I apply the stencil. I like to press it down in the center and then move outwards. Use my scraper tool to get that stuck on there nicely. And when I lift up my stencil, all those letters, all those centers will stay in place. All right, and just center it on the shirt. Use the scraper tool again. Get that on there. And now we can remove the transfer tape. So now I'll just press that down, make sure I've got a good seal so that when I apply the fabric ink, it's not going to come out or seep underneath these areas of the stencil mask. And then my protective layer is underneath there. I could do two separate stencils for two separate colors, but I'm just going to use paper to temporarily block off the areas where the colors are close together. And on a design like this, it might be fun if I had these two colors blending a little bit. That could be something you do on purpose. I'll just use this fabric ink with my brush and just do an up and down motion and try and get all of those areas that are exposed through the mask. I'm just using these colors as they are from the bottle, but if you mix a custom color, you're going to want to make sure you mix up enough for your entire design. Now I'll add my second color. Okay, and then you'll want to let this dry, get mostly dry before you peel off the stencil mask, but I think I'm probably close enough. I'm going to go ahead and take it off. And I'll go through and take out the letter centers. But you can see how that leaves a nice crisp line. I usually will actually finish drying it off and blow it with a blow dryer, and then to really set it well, I will press it with an iron just to make sure it's got a nice heat set for it. But that is a fun way to decorate a shirt. I've got a couple other examples I want to show you. This is a pair of little shoes I decorated with flamingos. So there's gold fabric ink and then two different colors of pink, and I actually cut 3 different stencils to get those to go on, but I thought those were really fun. I mentioned you can do a distressed look. Well, that's what I did with this #tired symbol. I just used a wide sponge and a really loose sponge and then just dabbed it a little bit, and so it left kind of a distressed look, which is a fun effect that you can't get with heat transfer. I should mention that if you are doing a stencil on a curved surface, like these shoes, they've got soft underneath, and so I stuffed them full of paper, so I had a firm surface to work with. And then the hat I actually placed over a bowl, so I had a firm surface to work with. So that's what you want to do just to make sure that you've got enough underneath there to create the pressure that you need. Rhinestones are a great way to add a little bling to your outfits. To use rhinestones, you'll need the following tools: rhinestone template material, rhinestone transfer tape, a cardboard backing where you can apply your stencil once it's cut out. You'll need a pick-me-up tool, rhinestones, a rhinestone brush, protective layer for when you iron, and you will need an iron. So let's go ahead and go into the software. So I've opened a strawberry rhinestone design, and rhinestone designs, you need to not resize them once you've opened them up, because those little holes are specifically sized for the types of rhinestones available. And most designs like this one will have a reminder there that says you shouldn't resize it. So you can go ahead and just select that text and delete it. We don't need that. And then make sure you don't resize the rhinestone design. I am going to change my page size though. This is pretty small, so I'm just going to cut a piece of rhinestone template material that is 3 inches by 3 inches. And so I've done that in my page setup panel. I am going to use my Cameo cutting mat for this. So I've selected my Cameo mat. And then let's just center this design on the page. Let's go to the Send panel. And I want to make sure that the rhinestone template material is selected. And I do want to cut, and I'm going to use my auto blade. And those settings look good. Remember to test cut with a new material that you're using the first time. I will go ahead and get this put on the mat, and then we'll send it in the software. So I've got my rhinestone template material that is cut to 3 inches by 3 inches, just like we set up in the page setup panel. And I will put this on the mat. I've got my roller set up back to accept the 12 by 12 mat. I'll just load it up. And press send. All right, we'll unload this. And go ahead and peel it off the mat. So now this is cut out. It's hard to see those little holes, but what you need to do is separate the template material from the holes that were cut out. So one way to do that is to just peel it up and leave the holes on the liner, but if they don't come off very easily, use something really sticky and it should pull most of those holes right off of there. There we go. Once we have those holes out, we need to apply this template material to a backing board. You just peel it off and place it on your cardboard. And now you can use the same piece of cardboard for as many templates as you can cut out and put on there. And so each one of these templates can be used over and over. Once you have your template in place, we're going to add the rhinestones. It's helpful to have a place to collect them. When you have more than one size of rhinestone like this design has, start with the largest ones first. Sprinkle them on there and use this soft little brush to kind of put those into place. So you can try back and forth motions. Sometimes circular works better. And you're just going to brush them into those holes. as many as you can. Once they stop going into the holes, you're going to use a pick-me-up tool to place the rest of them. So a pick-me-up tool has a little cap on the end and a little sticky side, and you can actually just individually pick up those rhinestones and put them into place. There is, the back side comes out, it's got kind of a pointed end or a flat end. You can just use whatever works for you. And you're just going to move those rhinestones into their holes. And you can peel off the end of the sticky part. If it gets too sticky or too well used, just rub it off and then twist to expose a little bit more of it. Okay, so we have all the largest ones in. We'll put these away and move on to the green. Okay, so we've got those rhinestones all facing the right direction. Now we're going to get our transfer tape ready and our jeans that we're going to apply it to. Okay, so we are going to put this on a pair of jeans just right there in front of the pocket. I'm just going to put a heat-proof surface down. The rhinestones themselves each have a heat-activated glue on the back, and so when you heat these up with the iron, the glue on the back is going to melt. And if your fabric is thin, sometimes that'll seep through, so I like to put a protective layer underneath. And then to actually get the rhinestones transferred, we'll use this special heat-resistant rhinestone transfer tape. Just lay it down on top of here. That is going to lift up those rhinestones all in the position we've put them in. Make sure you peel it up slowly, so if any rhinestones don't get picked up, you can press it back down and lift it up. All right, so let's put it on our jeans right about there. And then we can iron this in place and heat up that glue that's on the back. You can use a cloth or something like parchment paper. And we're just going to press the iron against there until the glue has a chance to heat up and adhere to the jeans. All right, let's see. So it's stayed in place. And then I like to actually, if it's something that you can turn inside out, I'll usually turn it inside out and just iron on the back side to make sure that that glue has fused really well to the fabric. That is how you do rhinestones. And I do have one other example I want to show you. I used rhinestones to add a little frog to this t-shirt. And again, it has a couple of different sizes, actually 3 different sizes, and those were just placed and heated like I showed you. Another way to apply fabric ink is with the Silkscreen Starter Kit. You can apply fabric ink with just stencil vinyl, but that's better for a one-time use. The Silkscreen Starter Kit lets you create the design once and apply it to a series of different surfaces, so you can make a whole bunch of them. The tools you'll need are the Silkscreen Starter Kit. So I've got my frame and the pieces, the silk and the heat transfer, the squeegee tool that comes with it, and it comes with black fabric ink, but I'm going to go ahead and use gold fabric ink. You can use any of the Silhouette fabric inks with the Silkscreen kit. So let's go ahead and go into the software. I have my design open. This is a design I'm going to put onto an apron, And I want to set up my page size in the page setup window to match the heat transfer that I'm going to use. And so that is 12 inches wide, 15 inches high, and I'm going to cut it directly from the piece of heat transfer. So I'm going to choose none for my cutting mat choice. When you're creating a design, it needs to fit within the Silkscreen kit frame, and so you need to keep it within 8.5 by 11 inches wide. This one I've got is about 3 inches wide and 6 inches high. Since we are using heat transfer, we'll go ahead and mirror this design. So let's flip it horizontally. I've just done a right click so I can flip horizontally. And then we want to center this on the page so it stays centered within the frame when we get to that point. We'll go to the Send panel and we want to choose Heat Transfer Smooth. The action is cut, tool is Auto Blade. I think I'm going to increase my force just a little bit. And when we load this, we're going to load the mat directly into the machine and we'll put it glossy side down. And when we are ready, we will click Send in the software. Here's my heat transfer that came with the starter kit. It's got a glossy side and a dull side. We'll put the glossy side down. Let me make sure my rollers are adjusted to cut it at 12 inches without a mat. Set that in the groove and lock it. Push up my release lever. I'll go ahead and load this. Okay, and I'll press Send so that can cut. Okay, we'll unload that. And since this is a stencil, we are going to weed away the design itself so the ink goes through where we want the design to show up. I'll just use my hook tool. So now this is heat transfer and we're going to iron it on to our silk. I've got a heat-proof surface under there. And I'll cover that so I'm not ironing directly on the liner. And on this you're going to go about 20 to 30 seconds. So when you're done, you should be able to peel the heat transfer or the liner away from the heat transfer and have the heat transfer stay stuck to the silk screen. Remember, you can always iron a little bit longer if you need to. So now my design is attached to my silk, and we want the heat transfer facing up and the silk screen is going to be underneath. To assemble the frame, all you need to do is match up your numbers. So like number 1 will go with number 1, 2 with 2, and so you'll just put those together. All of your slots, these grooves, are all going to be on the outside, and your numbers will match up that way. And then you just put the screws in. When you are ready to put your silk screen into the frame, you're going to put the frame on top of your silk screen so your shallow piece is down. And you'll center the design within your frame. And then I like to take a pencil. You're going to need to snip these corners off, and so you've got room for the stencil to fit into these grooves. So I just like to take a pencil and mark where that needs to be cut so it'll fit completely within the groove. And so you'll do that on all the corners. And now we can take the frame away and we'll just cut with scissors along those lines. And I drew my pencil line all the way up to where the wood was, so I'm going to slice just a little bit past that. And then I'm just going to snip that corner diagonally across. Just meet up where those slices are. Now we are ready to apply it to the frame. Remember, the heat transfer side is facing up. It's in what we call the well of the frame. And then we're going to take our inserts that go into the slots and we'll put kind of the rounded end in first. So make sure that you are applying enough force to get that to stay in there. Now we're going to put this design onto an apron. Again, I want a protective surface underneath because I'm going to be putting ink on here and I don't want it to bleed through. So make sure that you've got your ink and your squeegee ready, because once you put your ink in there on the heat transfer, you need to work quickly so it doesn't dry. So we'll put our design on here and center it. So make sure you apply a generous amount of ink all the way across so it fills your design. And you're just going to take your squeegee and drag it across vertically. If you need to make multiple passes, you can. Once you've got enough ink on there, you're just going to drag it smoothly down to pick up that extra ink. And if you were doing multiple designs, you would want to make sure that you've got your several aprons out or t-shirts or whatever you're doing, so they are ready to do one after the other. So once that's on there, we'll just lift it straight up, and there you've got your design. With your stencil, if you're doing multiple designs, you're going to want to rinse it with water or wipe it with a cloth in between every few designs to make sure that that doesn't dry and clog the screen. And then when you're done, you want to take it out of the frame. If you want to use it again, you're going to want to scrub it with warm soapy water and then just hang it somewhere safe where it can dry and be stored so it's ready to use the next time. And then make sure that you let your fabric ink dry completely. Now that you have all these different mediums you can use to customize your apparel, why not mix and match? In this project, we're going to use fabric ink mixed with heat transfer, and hopefully as we go you'll see where you can find ideas to mix and match your other materials as well. For this project, we're going to use stencil vinyl and the transfer tape that comes with it, a hook tool, fabric ink and a way to apply it, and heat transfer. And then we'll also make sure we've got our protective surface since we're using the fabric ink. So let's go into the software and we'll set up this design. So I have got this cute star design opened and I've added colors for what I want the final project to look like. And I want to resize the star design and everything inside of it. So I'm going to select it all and just drag a corner handle to resize it to about 4 inches wide. And I'm going to cut this directly from stencil vinyl, and so I want my page size to be 9 inches wide, and we'll go ahead and use 12.5 inches high and no cutting mat. Since this is going to be a stencil, we use the rectangle drawing tool to draw a square around it. I'm going to leave about 1 inch around each part of the design. So I'm going to make this about 6 inches square. If you hold your shift key while you're creating this rectangle, it will be a perfect square. Okay, that's close enough. And that will leave enough room around the star design so when I apply paint, I've got that blocked off from the extra paint. Now remember, we're creating a mask, so the ink is only going to go through where we have the holes. So I'm using multiple colors. That means I need one mask for my yellow star, and I'm going to leave that with the square border. And then I need one mask for these little pink cheeks. What I'm going to do is make a copy of the star and the cheeks. So I'm going to hold my Shift key while I select both those together, and then I'm going to duplicate that and just drag it down. This is actually going to be the stencil for my cheeks. I'm not going to do that extra square around it. The star itself will act as both the mask for adding the ink to the cheeks and will also help me line up exactly where those cheeks should be for the star. And you'll see that as we go on. I'm going to go ahead and empty that fill color, give it the same line color, and group it so it doesn't move. And I'm going to move the black part over. The black part is going to be heat transfer, so I don't need it right now while I'm cutting my stencil. And while I have it selected, I'm going to go ahead and mirror it. So I'll right click and choose Flip Horizontally. And I'll group these together. So basically what I'm going to do is with these right here, these are all going to be cut from stencil vinyl. And so what I can do is go to my send panel, choose Vinyl Glossy, and I'll cut with the auto blade. And I'll go ahead and send that, and I can cut it. And then when that's done, I can move those off of the page over into the holding area, and I will move my heat transfer over. And for that, I can either cut from the roll or I can cut again from my mat and just cut from a small piece. So I could just cut this from heat transfer. So I would, after I've already finished cutting my stencil vinyl, I'll go over to the send panel, and since that's on my cutting area, this time this is what we'll cut. And I'll just make sure that I change it to heat transfer smooth and cut with the auto blade and send it. And I'm not going to show cutting this time, but I will show you what we do next after it's already cut out. So I've got my stencils cut out and weeded. This is my star that's going to have the yellow go into it. And then this is the piece with the star outline and the holes where the cheeks are. So all I did was I removed the little holes where the pink is going to go and the outer edge. So this is going to be my mask for the pink, and this is my mask for the yellow. And then I have cut out my heat transfer also, and I'll go ahead and weed that so it's ready to go. We'll get a blank onesie. And remember, if you're using fabric ink, you need to put something underneath it to protect it from bleeding through. And I will put my transfer tape just to cover the star so I can transfer it over. I'll just center that and smooth it down on the onesie. And remove the transfer tape. So my mask is in place for the yellow, and I'll just quickly put that yellow on there. And once I have that all filled in, I'm going to let it dry completely because I'm going to be adding more layers on top of it. And if you want to use a hair dryer to speed up that process, that is totally fine. I do that all the time. So I've got my yellow on here and it's completely dry. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the stencil. Now I'm ready to put those pink cheeks on there with a little star. So I've got my stencil where all I have is the star that I cut out with the two little holes cut in there, and I'm just going to use that as a guide on where to put the star so the cheeks go in the right place, and to also mask off around that pink. When I talked about fabric ink before, you can make your own custom color. So I'm going to make a light pink with just a little bit of white and even less pink. And I'll mix those together, make kind of a pale pink. And I don't need very much here because I'm not covering a big area. So I'm just gonna dab on there for my second layer. And here's where I would use a hairdryer again to speed this up with the drying. Those cheeks are dry. I'm going to go ahead and remove my stencil. And my last step is to apply the heat transfer. I'll just line that up on there and iron it on. There we go. I would go ahead at this point and turn it inside out and iron on the back side just to make sure that it's all set. But that is a fun way to add both fabric ink and heat transfer to create the fine detail or whatever you want to do to get either custom colors or the design that you want with the different media that you have now that you know how to use them all. So now I want to show you just a couple more examples of how you can mix your media together, all these different things that you've learned. So these are the shoes with fabric ink, and it's fun to add a rhinestone design to something like this. So you could make any little rhinestone design you want. You could even use it as accents depending on what your design is, but that would be fun if you just add rhinestones to something that's also got fabric ink. Here's this bib that has a fabric applique, and with heat transfer I can add a cute saying to really dress that up. Once I iron that on, you can see what it would look like. And again, if you've got a fabric design that maybe is a little bit simple, you can dress it up with maybe some glitter heat transfer to really make that one a lot more fun. And that's the outer shell. This one would be fun with flocked heat transfer to add a design to the inside of the shell. Or again, with fabric applique, you could cut a vinyl stencil and add fabric ink. This gives you a lot of options to customize what you do with your apparel when you're mixing and matching different mediums. I hope you can see how many different materials you can use with your silhouette machine to dress up your apparel. It's such a great skill to be able to personalize and customize anything you want for gifts or any occasion. For more help with either software or materials, be sure to go to the Silhouette YouTube channel, the Silhouette blog, or reach out to customer support at silhouetteamerica.com. Have fun customizing your apparel.